Welcome to $0 Landlord Bootcamp, where you can learn how to buy multifamily property for $0 out of pocket. So the objective is to teach a $15,000 course with an infinite percent off discount, meaning it pays you, to enable anybody to buy multifamily property for zero out of pocket. Freeselling.com mission, which is the overarching company, is to bring resources, trust, and just common sense to real estate because it sucks right now. So quick case study is I overpaid for property. I bought it for $335K, but I put $0 down on it. But then we fixed the property for $0 out of pocket and appraised for $800K 1 year later. Split the work with partners, and I own 40% of it. And after spending roughly about 21 minutes a week and doing it 100% remote from closing to computer, then I end up doing it for $10,000 an hour roughly. So here's a quick case study of everybody in the US. Top 25 jobs don't come close. If you add them all up, it still doesn't come close. You got to multiply it by 4 after combining top 25 jobs in the entire US. So I'm not saying that I have the secret to make gazillions of dollars, but I sure as hell do work very efficiently. So if you want to look at my track record, you can go online to freeselling.com. So a little bit more about me. Year one of real estate, I bought 1 unit using my money. Then I bought 51 units in year 2 using other people's money. Went back to my bad ways and bought it with my money again. And then I bought 225 units using other people's money. So there's a very clear trend line of what works and what doesn't. 96% of my properties were bought $0 out of pocket. And I'm estimated now to be in about the top 200 mobile home park buyers in the US because I buy a lot of mobile home parks. Everything we're going to be talking about, though, is relevant to all of real estate. If you want to look at more of my deal history, you can go online to the website at freeselling.com. 6 of my partners, though, have a very good opinion, at least, because they have $0 out of pocket and they close their first deal. And most of them have done it within their first year, and now they own over 100 rentals. No gurus or gotchas. Literally, we can all work together, and I usually actually end up having the same percent ownership as them at the end of the day. So, more stuff about my background. I was U.S. Air Force Academy grad, did 5 years in the Air Force. During that point in time, then I saved the taxpayers about $800 million. That means you too. And then I wrapped up a $7 billion program a year ahead of schedule. So, while I was good at my W-2, I lacked freedom. And everybody's probably in the same boat, and they are probably spending years suffering to find their own financial path. So I want to make sure that you don't go through what I did, which is losing money, friends, and missing out on life events just so that I can learn how to do this. Instead, I have a community now. So go ahead and join it so you can learn for free and get your freedom, or you can suffer like I did. So, module 1. This is why and how to buy multifamily. So, first off, let's talk about the difference between single family and multifamily. So, single family, valued off of the Smith family purchase price next door. So it's called comparables. It makes investing very difficult when you are valuing based off the next door sale price because the Smith family cares about how they feel. That's the Smith family. There's your enemy because the entire rest of the planet does it differently. It is based off of return. So nobody buys an entire apartment complex just to live in every unit. They care about the actual return at the end of the day. That is why they have an apartment complex. So here's a quick example on what we'll be talking about as asset versus business value, and this is why multifamily is so much different. It is $300K net per year for a restaurant as an example. We'll call it $600K for the whole restaurant, right? We'll just say that times 2 because that's how businesses get valued. The asset value of the restaurant is like $100K maybe. That's the literal equipment that goes into the restaurant. So that's the replacement cost. Now the business value, which is intangible value, i.e. stuff you don't touch, that is about $540K in that type of scenario, right? We're just kind of ballparking it there. And that's how something is used. So the business to asset value, in this case, for a restaurant is like 22%. For single family, it's 5%. But then for multifamily, it's like 20 to 50%. And at the end of the day, business value is way easier to increase and is usually way, way, way cheaper to do as well. And that's really why multifamily is so magical, honestly, unlike how you can just generate money out of thin air. That's what we're going to be talking about. This is why it's not the same as single family. The calculations and everything we're going to be talking about, by the way, applies to pretty much anything in the world from an economic stance, but we're just focusing on multifamily property. We're not going to be talking about shopping malls or anything else. So that's single family portfolios, quadplexes, duplexes kind of sort of fall in that category. But like mobile home parks, like a low quality multifamily, and then apartment complexes is what you normally are thinking about when you hear multifamily. So why multifamily? Why do I keep saying multifamily? It's because rentals are always in demand. Everyone always needs a place to live. And offices and malls maybe aren't always in demand. If you don't believe me, go look at 2020. Go look around at any shopping mall in the US. It's probably dead or dying. So That's all great on why we want to do multifamily specifically, but a lot of you are probably coming in this from a single family wholesale background, perhaps. It just tends to be pretty popular. So I want you to really think about this for a second, is who would you trust to spot issues and tell you the issues if you are buying a car? Would it be the car salesman who has literally never owned a car and they live off the sales of the cars? Or would you trust the person who fixes cars and lives off the repairing hours for the cars? Right? So this is the difference between wholesalers and landlords in most people's perception. And while that might not be fair or accurate, too bad, that is true. But honestly, if you haven't ever owned a property, you probably don't know what all goes into owning property. This is where there's an easy middle ground for anybody that's like, I just want to stay in the wholesaler camp no matter what. This is also good for you because the mechanic who lives off selling the cars that they also fix is going to be skilled and is actually probably going to tell you a little bit more about cars. They just know more. So that is a wholesaler who would also own property in that case. So how do we get into buying these? Now we've talked about why it's important to buy, why multifamily specifically. Now we're going to be talking about how to actually structure these things, right? So syndication in a nutshell just means buying with other partners. And that's the main model we're going to be talking about for pretty much everything. That's how to get into property for literally no money. You're just buying with partners and that's it. So you have general partners, also known as GPs. And those are going to be paying with their time, but not with their money. So they own some percentage of the LLC that is buying the property at the end of the day. And they are responsible for all the work for, coordinating property managers, contractors, whatever, but they don't actually swing the hammer. They're not a contractor. That's not their job. They're just there as a percent owner. So think of this as like, the board of directors for Amazon. They're not literally delivering packages, but they run the show for Amazon. But they might not literally be throwing in cash for Amazon, right? Now, the people that throw in cash for Amazon, stockholders, basically, right, would be limited partners, so to speak. That's kind of sort of the analogy we're going to go with here. But a limited partner pays to own a percentage of a company, right? But they only pay with money. They don't pay with time, which is really nice because they're 100% passive. They don't do squat. Finally, we also have lenders, and lenders, banks, whatever term you want to use. Sometimes you'll hear debt partner, and that's really bad because they're not actually a partner at the end of the day. They are just lending money at whatever percent interest. They don't have ownership, but they'll be like hard money lenders, which we'll get into later, banks, stuff like that. So again, quick recap, general partners do all the work. Limited partners don't do squat, probably chilling on a bank or chilling on a beach. And then our bank is going to be just having lots of cash because they have lots of cash. And that's their whole profit model. Okay, so now we're going to look at a little quick case study here on how this would go down. So if we have a GP that is buying a 500K property via an LLC, because that's how we're going to orchestrate the percentage of ownership, then you're probably going to be the GP. You're trying to buy this. Now, let's just say it ends up selling for $700K at the end of the day. You're going to need some lending in order to buy $500,000 worth of stuff. So that's where a bank would come in. And that's about $400K maybe. And then we'll call it $100,000 for the limited partner. So they're going to end up getting 75% of the profit, which is a lot. But I'm just exaggerating the situation here just to show you what this looks like. So if they have 75% ownership, that means that you're doing all the work and you get 25% ownership. But what's so cool about that is you do it for jack squat in. So this 40K bank profit goes back out of the profit. Then 120K would be for limited partner payout. Then that'd actually be 40K for you. That's how you just generate this money out of thin air, is how it kind of looks, right? Assuming we get it for 500 and we turn it into 700,000, by the way, not tiny little pennies here we're talking about. This is actually a good chunk of change. So that is an infinite percent return for you if you put no money in. So this is now leverage types. And I'm going to talk about this concept, like a whole lot of different concepts, honestly, for leverage because they apply to everything. And this is how you get from where you are currently to where you want to be, is you have to use leverage somehow. And this isn't necessarily talking about capital leverage, which is what you're probably used to thinking about. This is all sorts of different kinds of leverage. So the efficiency by which you go put what you have in to get what you need back out, that is leverage in a nutshell, right? I can either do a lot of effort and maybe get my output, or I can just simply move the fulcrum, so to speak, and then have a significantly easier day because I am doing less effort at the end, at the start of the day. So, for main three types. Number one is capital leverage, right? And that's going to be borrowing to buy since you don't have enough cash. So if you don't have money to do something, you're going to just go borrow it. Now, I'm not advocating that you go, do a credit card bill at 26% or something crazy like that, but it's just you're buying stuff when you don't necessarily have the money to buy stuff. Way less money in, mostly same result. That is capital leverage, right? Turn a little bit of money into a lot of money. Time leverage. That is going to be outsourcing since you don't have enough time. So it is way less time in, but you mostly get the same result back out. Turn a lot of time that you normally have to do something or required in order to actually do it. Now you're just turning into a significantly less time requirement. Finally, there's skill leverage. And skill leverage is not often talked about. That's hiring someone because they just do it better than you. That's not hiring someone just to hire someone and get it off your plate. That's hiring them because they're better than you. So way less skill required, mostly same result. So you can spend a bunch of money and go do a bunch of studying in order to go how to do whatever the skill is, or you can just outsource it and have a lot of time. So way less studying. Okay, so now we're going to look at an example of capital leverage, right? Imagine you're buying a $100,000 house. The house appreciates, you sell it for $130, right? So 130,000, that is, $100,000 in, 30K profit because you're selling it for 130K back out. That's a 30% return. That's what the math looks like if you don't believe me. Pretty straightforward. So if you use capital leverage, then you are putting 3.5% down potentially with a bank, and then you pay 10K in fees, sure. So your total profit after appreciating to 130K looks like 20K, right? So you're going to make 20K profit because instead of 30, now you're paying bank fees. However, you did it for $3,500 down. So that is now a 571% return. So you went from 30% return, now you way over 10x'd it, and you got a significantly higher output. Total profit is lower, but significantly more efficient. So now we're going to talk about time leverage. If you are looking for 3 hours a week times 10 weeks for a 100K house, and you buy it and the house appreciates by 30K, so now you're selling it for 130K, then that's 30K profit. 30 hours to find it, that's $1,000 an hour basically. That's your working rate essentially that you're operating at. Now, if you utilize time leverage, then if you spend half an hour maybe talking to an agent who ends up going out and finding the house for you, and then they charge the seller a $2,000 fee, not you, then your house still appreciates by 30K. Then you did the exact same output with no cost differential, and you did it, in this case, it would be 60 times faster. So a lot more efficient. 60x better, and you got the time left over afterwards, which if you want to go buy more property and go look for more stuff or find more agents, you can do that now. You can do whatever you want. And the time to repeating is the key factor because that's what gets into like cash conversion cycle and some other stuff we can talk about later. But basically, you're making money a lot faster. So if you're able to double your money even quicker, you're going to make a lot more money at the end of the day. Time leverage is how you are basically compressing your profit curve is essentially what you're doing. So you're just making it happen faster. Okay, now we're going to talk about skill leverage. If you are buying 10 homes for $1 million that are going to end up profiting $400,000, let's just say the bank's going to loan $700K, you need $300K, right? LP, limited partner, is going to fund the $300K for 70% equity. So then you, the general partner, end up getting 30% equity on this venture. So you're going to make $120K basically because you're getting 30% of the profit. That's more or less how we're going to structure it. So you're going to be coordinating management and contractors and admin and finance, but you do management and contractors really, really well. So these take you half the time. So this looks like contractors, management, admin, finance, but you do the first two in half the time. Your total time in is 600 hours, and you're doing it at about $200 an hour rate this whole time. And we're talking about this project could span multiple years potentially, right? So if we use skill leverage, you get a way better output because let's just say you add on a partner who is twice as good as you are at admin and finances, then they're going to get a better financial deal up front. So that's maybe $300K from the LPs for 30% instead of 50%. And then we'll call that $200K for the profit for the GPs, general partners. And that would be $100K per person because now there's two people. Now, if the partner adds an administrative system, that's going to end up saving you time for contractors, call it 25 hours. And then they also add some verbiage to maybe the lease, and that's going to end up saving you a lot of time with management because there's less tenant issues. Maybe you can scratch their back too and have management make the financial reports or something like that, right? Because they're taking care of finances. So now you can end up saving them time. So say it's him 30 hours total. So what this looks like for you, you are spending 75 hours for contractors and 80 hours for management. Your total dollar an hour is $645, up from $200 an hour. So you are making $645 per hour that you are working on this, and you have to work a lot less hours, which is nice. You're basically making about the same profit too. Your partner's time is 100 hours, and call it 70 hours because you save them time on finances. Their rate, $588 an hour, and they're making $100,000 over 170 hours. So yeah, you earn 83% as much, so it's really close. But the point is you do it 3 times faster. So you sacrifice 17% profit to do the entire thing 3 times faster, which means that you can now go 3 times the deals. You have 445 hours to go figure out what you want to do next. So you can literally repeat this multiple times. And that's exactly what I do. So who's a better pilot, A or B? Assuming you know how many hours they've been flying, that should probably tell you most of the answers you need to know, right? So you get skill leverage by being perceived as skilled, but you can keep it by actually being skilled. So just make sure you're actually being skilled at the end of the day, because if you increase your skill, it is a lot easier to build relationships. And this is the difference between inbound and outbound relationships, like I call it. Outbound relationship looks like an active search. So you have to spend time, effort, or money to find people, figure out who to work with. You got to attend a real estate conference to meet people, for instance, or you make the I know a guy type of connection, right? It's a lot easier for inbound, which is passive, if you are very skilled, because then it's a lot less resources you got to spend. And then they'll just invite you to speak at the conference. And then you are literally the guy that people make the outbound relationship about. So other people make all their relationships based off of you. That's a lot easier. You don't have to do nearly as much work. So bottom line is increase your skill. You get a lot easier relationships, much better network. At the end of the day, your network is your net worth. If it takes 3 times the skill, but it makes you 10 times the money, then that is skill leverage in a nutshell. Okay, so what is this ad for? If you know who the company is, that would be great, because it is Mint Mobile. And you probably know that because of Ryan Reynolds and the fact that he's in movies. So you know Ryan Reynolds and he makes you happy. So therefore Mint Mobile must make you happy, right? It's an emotional connection, and that's called brand. And this is brand leverage, would be if Mint Mobile is partnering with Ryan Reynolds because everybody knows Ryan Reynolds. Additionally, you could have content leverage, which is kind of like me making this video right now. I don't actually have to explain leverage ever again. I can just send the video to people, right? So I don't have to spend my time anymore explaining this over and over and over. I can just give them that. And that is content leverage. Relationship leverage would be if you're friends with the roof company owner, so you just get a better deal at the end of the day. But that's, you know him and he knows you, so he's able to help you out. Information leverage, though, would be if you are literally the person that owns the roofing company, for instance, and you are looking to buy a house that is advertised to have a bad roof. Well, if you're a good roof company owner, you'll actually maybe be able to spot that, hey, that's not as big a deal as I thought it was. So if you have that information, you can take that to your advantage through information leverage. Code leverage is if you are programming a spreadsheet, for instance, instead of doing all your calculations by hand or on your phone or whatever, that's not nearly as effective as if you do it on an actual spreadsheet. I would say if you are not good at calculating anything for real estate, you probably need to go learn how to do basic functionality in Google Sheets. Process leverage is if you're making like something like a Word doc, for instance, that's a little easier to use. So kind of like content leverage in a way. You do it once, you don't have to do it again. That's the general idea here. But in this case, maybe instead of calling up Granny for her lease information, I just send her the lease and she just fills it out. Now I don't have to actually call her up at all. Optimization leverage is if you are able to repeat stuff a lot and then also improve on it. So this is the exact reason why the small business will die every day to Walmart, because Walmart outperforms them. They literally just do more reps. That is it. But they don't just do reps without actually improving. They really focus on improving. Amazon's the exact same way. It's no mystery that all of a sudden you can get same day delivery. Resource. That is, if you are having resource leverage, you just have more resources than the other person. You can just win. So if I'm offering on a house for 100K cash, no bank, then I'm probably going to have a stronger offer than somebody says 100K with a bank. And it's going to be a 30-day closing, and it's due to appraisal contingencies and a bunch of this other stuff, right? So small money bag versus big money bag. If you are working at $50 an hour, hire lawn care at anything under $50 an hour. Don't mow your own yard, right? If you have a higher rate, it doesn't make any sense to do that. If you can avoid 2 years of plumbing school, just hire the plumber. You can't learn everything. You're literally going to die in less than 80 years, right? If you can't do 100%, then you may as well do 1/20th down payment at the end of the day. Because if you put 1/20th down payment, you can buy 20 times the stuff. No trophy if you buy all cash. And if you are partnering with somebody and they can give you a higher dollar an hour, bring them on board because Jeff Bezos is not delivering your packages. Go through other people that are better at stuff than you are. All right, now we're going to talk about how to actually calculate all the financials that go into this. We've heard a lot of numbers, heard a lot of different strategies. First off, you have gross operating income, also known as GOI, and that's just your gross per year. That's total annual income from stuff like rent or laundromat in the basement or whatever, right? So then you also have your expenses, which is the total expenses that the property incurs. This is not all expenses known to man. This is just the property related expenses. So that's going to mean your property management, your property tax, your insurance, your maintenance, your lawn care, trash, etc. But this does not mean you're going to be factoring in your income tax into your or into your expenses rather. You are not going to be incorporating the owner's loan payments into that either. And you are not going to be incorporating tenant paid expenses. So if you take your gross minus your expense, you are then left with your net, which is your net operating income. So that's your gross minus your expense per year. So it's kind of what it looks like before and after. Gross is a lot, and then net's not a whole lot. There's also a funny saying, which is revenues for vanity and cash flows for sanity. So it's basically, at the end of the day, whatever you make for your gross is not going to be equal to your actual cash flow at the end of the day. Now, NOI is not the same as cash flow, but it gets close to it. So OPEX is going to be your expense divided by your gross, and that is your reverse profit margin. So that's your money that you lose to expenses. And that's like a percentage, typically between 20 to 50%. And your cash flow is the actual cash flow. And this is NOI minus your mortgage payments if you have them. If you don't have any mortgage payments, then your NOI equals your cash flow. So your principal and interest is only part of your PITI, which is your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, because your taxes and insurance you've already accounted for in your expenses. So here's a quick graphic here that illustrates this. Is you have your gross operating income. Within that, you have expenses. And you have net operating income, which is your NOI. And then within your NOI, some part of that payment will go to paying off your mortgage, and then some part of that will be going towards cash flow, which is where the remainder is going towards cash flow, really. So your cash flow is what you actually put in your pocket at the end of the day. Your OPEX percentage is going to be how much of your gross is your expense, and your profit margin would be vice versa. So here's a quick example of how this all goes together. So if you look at the following here, property rent's $1,000 a month, taxes is $300 a year, management's 10% of rent, right? So we're kind of doing different time scales here, but the main question asked is what actually gets incorporated into your NOI. So that's going to be these items here. If you notice, water did not make the cut because it's paid by a tenant. Same with sewer. Also, your mortgage payment does not get included. If you take your sum total for these, your gross per year, make sure to convert everything over to year. Your gross per year is $12,000, and then your expenses is going to be $3,300 in this case. If you take your NOI, your NOI is going to be equal to your gross minus your expense. So your NOI is about $8.7K. Your OPEX is $27.5 because that's your expense divided by your gross. And your cash flow is your NOI, your net, minus your mortgage payment that you're doing. That's how much money you actually get to put in your pocket. So price is what you pay, but value is what it's worth. You can also hear the saying of value is what you get, so to speak. That's if you're buying something else. And the key is which side of the coin you're on. So price is if you're buying, and value is if you're selling usually, because fair market value is what the market thinks it is. Something's only worth what you can actually sell it for at the end of the day. So you got to make sure you're staying realistic though when you're determining value, because a house that's been listed for 100K is definitely not worth 100K if it's still unsold. The value based off the fair market value is something less than 100K. So make sure to negotiate, because people always buy when they feel that the value is greater than price, not when the price hits a certain number. So here's a quick example of a nice couch or nicer couch versus a really bad couch, right? If they're both free, one of these is objectively better, and you feel that way because the value is perceived to be that way. Now we're going to talk about cap rate and how this factors in. So cap rate is NOI divided by total price, and is the annual return for the property without debt or income tax. So that is not accounting for my personal income tax. This is property tax would be okay to factor into your NOI. But cap rate is going to be measuring how that property would do regardless of who owns it. Cap rate is going to be relative depending on what you're actually using it for. So you could say NOI divided by value or NOI divided by price. It just depends on how you're utilizing it. Are you buying or are you selling? And a property bought with like 100K or bought for 100K, and if it's doing $9,000 a year in net, And that's going to be a 9% purchase cap rate is what you'd say. Again, it's important to clarify. Do you mean purchase? Do you mean sell? What are you talking about? The same property, though, if we had 10K NOI year, which is per year, of course, then that's going to be 10% selling cap rate, right? So again, you can utilize it on both sides of the coin here. Your total price, in this case, where I say at the top, NOI divided by total price, you can say that with rehab or without rehab. You just have to be very specific on what you're factoring into this equation. But otherwise, pretty simple equation. So cap rate equals NOI divided by total price. Now, if NOI divided by price equals cap rate, then you also have NOI divided by your cap rate is equal to your price. So that's reasonably straightforward, I believe, algebra or arithmetic. So this is how it gets really factored in, though, and this is where the real magic starts to happen. So if you're buying or selling, you're just going to say price, depending on what you're doing, is equal to your NOI divided by your cap rate. And we use a fair market cap rate, which we'll call FMCR every now and then, which is determined by the market, by the way. You don't just get to artificially pick whatever you want. Then, and make sure, by the way, pick it from something that's similar, because if you pick a cap rate from a car wash and you try to say, well, that car wash is a 10%, but this apartment complex is what, supposed to also be exactly 10% because it's the same as a car wash? That doesn't make any sense. Make sure you do something that's very, very, very similar. And if you can't be accurate, then you at least have to be pessimistic, which basically means assume the worst. So if we're buying a 100K property, making 15K a year net income, so the net operating income per year, if that 15K NOI divided by your 100K purchase, that means a 15% purchase cap rate. The fair market cap rate, let's just call it 10%, because we find a very comparable property that is selling at a 10% cap rate, then that is what we will also try to sell it at. So if we do that, then our NOI divided by our cap rate equals fair market value. So we say 15K a year NOI divided by 10% is equal a $150,000 fair market value, even though we just bought it for 100K, right? So we compress the cap rate from 15% to 10%. So you hear this known as cap rate compression. That's all it is we're simply saying, hey, we bought it at 15%, but now we're going to resell it at a 10%. Now, what's cool is you can take this a step further. If we make it worth a 7% cap rate, now we'll talk about how in just a second, in theory, we could make this worth $214,000 by only compressing the cap rate. That's the only thing we'd be changing in this equation. Easier properties have a lower fair market cap rate because of the following example here. So if property A and B are the exact same, but B is a huge pain to deal with, then if A has a 9 cap, let's just say fair market says it's a 9% cap rate, then B should have a higher percent return because it's a lot harder to run, right? Another way to think about this is if you are operating real estate and you got to deal with tenants and toilets and a bunch of other stuff, and it's not really 100% passive because you're having to deal with stuff every now and then, why would you have a lower return than just throwing money in your bank account? It just doesn't make any sense, right? So if you're doing more work, you deserve more pay. That's essentially what it boils down to at the end of the day. So here's a quick chart of some other things I threw together. You got savings account, managed fund, long-term stocks, property A and B, owning a business, right? Depends on what the exact variable is, but generally it gets harder and more riskier the higher up you go on that. So if property A and B are the exact same on everything, it makes sense logically that the harder one should have a higher return because it's a lot more work. So this is how we actually plug in the math at the end of the day. And we've already kind of talked about this, but I'm just going to drill it home again another time. So your red is going to be your purchase, and then your green is going to be everything to deal with the sale / fair market value. So the purchase, if it's 100K and it's doing 9K a year net, we'll call it a purchase cap rate at 9%. But if a fair market cap rate is 8%, now we can again resell it as a little bit higher. So there's a $12.5 thousand profit in this scenario, just by simply spotting that the cap rate is instead of a 9%, we're changing it to an 8%, because fair market value perhaps, or fair market cap rate is at 8%. So this is a lot of math. It's not that much though if you really look at it, and I include all the formulas on here. So just take a second to look at this, because if you don't actually really understand everything, you're going to have a really hard time learning what's coming next. And you're going to have what's called a muddy foundation. And you can't really build that high. So if you're building a mud hut, you don't want your mud hut being able to only go up to 2 stories. You want to build a skyscraper so you can build it forever. So you have a really solid foundation, really understand this, pause the video, zoom in. If you're watching vertical on your phone, you're not doing it right, turn it sideways and actually be able to zoom in a little bit. Okay. Now we're going to talk about increasing and identifying value. So now we've talked about, yeah, that's great. We can go from an 8%, 9%, whatever, down to a 4% cap rate in theory, right? We compress the cap rate, make a bunch of money. But now we're going to talk about exactly how to get down to it. So the 3 levers of increasing business value is 1, you increase your gross income. So be filling vacancy, and that always comes first. You don't just come to the door and start increasing rent on everybody. That gives landlords a bad name, and it's just really bad for the tenants. And there's a million other things you can do to improve value. The last thing you should do is increasing rent. And that is the literal dead last thing you should do. Now, you should stay under market rent at all times, because if you go over market rent, people are going to move out and they're going to complain, and it's going to be bad for everybody, and nobody wins. So you can also decrease expenses. This is stuff you do after you fill vacancy, but before you increase rent. And with decreasing expenses, doesn't mean just be cheap for no reason. It's like figure out what is actually being paid and so we can cut out. So a big one is billing utilities back to the tenants, because they end up using less utilities if they're the ones paying for it. But you can also cut expenses at the end of the day, where like 5 trash cans instead of 1 dumpster. That makes a lot more sense to just do 1 dumpster if it's cheaper. And then you can also recompete things out. So if I have the same lawn care guy for 20 years and he was a friend of the previous family's owner or whatever, then he's probably going to be charging a fortune, or maybe not. And it might be time for me to recompete that contract to get a cheaper price. And then you have compressing the cap rate, just like we talked about earlier. Is if you just make it easier to run, i.e. if you make it more like a bank account, which is very, very passive, then it makes sense that you can start to lower your cap rate essentially. So you want to be adding management is an easy way to do it. And then also standardizing your rent, because then it's a lot more fair to all the tenants and they just have less complaints and less issues. Additionally, if you just buy at a discount, that's the other way of looking at this, is if you're just buying at above market cap rate and then you are selling at market cap rate, then you basically are compressing your cap rate at the end of the day, which means that you're making money. So now we're going to talk about pro forma, which is also known as future state. So if you see this on a financial statement, you might see it as PF or like just P, but it just means the future. So BOY1 might look like beginning of year 1 is a little acronym they use. EOY would be end of year. EOM would be end of month, right? So there's a lot of different multiple future states. You can say year 1, year 2, best case, worst case, nuclear scenario, whatever, right? A lot of different timelines basically, right? So if you were born in the last 2 decades or so, then this would be your reference. Otherwise, it's back to the future. Okay, numbers that change over time. Cap rate is probably going to change over time. If you make it a lot easier to run, you can justify selling for a lot lower cap rate. If you add management, that's the primary way to do that. It's less work. And standardized rent, like we were talking about, reduces the upset tenant issues. Additionally, for rent is going to change, because if 2 units are identical, the highest or newly rented one is the best indicator of market demand. So if I take a comparable from 20 years ago, it's probably not accurate today. Rent changes. So you want to try to standardize the rent for everybody as best as you possibly can. But then you also want to raise the rent floor, not the ceiling. So that means if I have an 800, 900, and 1,000 unit, dollars per month that is, and they're all the exact same unit type, I should not raise the rent on the 1,000 unit guy first. I should try to bring the $800 a month guy up to the 1,000. Should hopefully make sense, where it's just try to standardize, but that's the way to do it. Expenses, just assume it's about 5% year over year, typically for most of your expenses, but taxes and insurance can jump up a lot at the time of actual purchase. So now we're going to talk about the utility bill back. So utility companies are a legal monopoly. They are literally always going to win. So you want to try to not let them win and let you and your tenant win instead. So if you bill back, that is the best way to do that. So tenants that are having to pay for their own bill at the end of the day are just going to use less. So if the landlord pays the utility bill, it looks something like this: $800 a month plus $200 a month for utilities. Landlord gets $600, tenant gets $800. Or they pay $800 rather. So if the tenant pays the utility bill though, then it might be that the landlord's willing to not increase the rent, and you'll see why in a second, is because it's maybe $700 a month rent and $100 a month for utilities that the tenant is paying. So the landlord would end up getting the rent for $700 and the tenant pays $800. So if you notice, it's the exact same cost to the tenant, but the landlord's net profit is a lot greater in that case by $100. So you can have this as a sliding scale. You can favor the tenant or you can favor the landlord. Either way, it's fine. But you definitely don't want to be having your tenant having free electrical, because I guarantee you they're going to go Bitcoin mine. And do not put that in your lease, because you're just going to put that in their ear. So just simply don't even have them pay for electrical to begin with. Okay, level 1 underwrite is where you ballpark everything. So you're just doing this as fast as possible to see if the deal is even worthy of continuing. If it passes a level 1 underwrite, proceed to level 2 underwrite, which is where you're going to estimate everything. And that's where you're going to try to get as detailed information as you can, but you're not going to go all the way through. Level 3 underwrite, though, is where you are proving everything. Like, you know this like the back of your hand, and you know every number associated with the deal. When you are learning, you got to do all 3 levels, regardless if the deal is good. I call this like just the level 1, 2, 3 underwrite system. It's just something that I've done that has saved me a massive amount of time. I highly recommend you do this, but particularly when you're learning, is you should go all the way through to the end as if you are going to buy it. Because if you don't practice every time and you do land a deal, you're going to lose it because you suck. So make sure you are practicing all the way through as detailed as you possibly can. So level 1 underwrite is the sniff test. So this is in gold and bordered in yellow because it is insanely useful. And it looks really complex. It looks like calculus, but it's not. So you have your future state minus your current state minus rehab. That's it, right? So we already know how to calculate stuff earlier. And if you look at it, it says GOI times 1 minus OPEX divided by cap rate. If you know what that is, that just means your value. That's it. So it's your gross income that you're keeping, i.e. your net income, is on the top line. Then on the bottom line is your cap rate. Easy peasy. So you do the exact same thing for your current state and for your future state. However, your numbers are going to be slightly different for the two of them. So this formula disregards cash flow completely because we're assuming it's just going to be worst case scenario, you're going to lose it all. And also there's a bunch of issues that pop up. And we're going to take our future gross income, or FGOI in this case. We're just going to look at rentals online. So whatever's cheapest. Then your OPEX and your cap rate, you're going to want to use a chart like this. So they're going to change over time. You don't actually have to know all the expenses. You can just use OPEX estimates, but this is probably the best way to do it, honestly. So if you need this resource, it's going to be on preselling.com. This is insanely useful in order to very quickly assess, is a property even worth pursuing? Cash flow is great, but you really are going to be chasing the equity gain at the end of the day. Level 2 underwrite is where you are estimating everything. So you're using market research for cap rate and rent. So you are knowing everything you possibly can. You also want to line item and itemize all expenses. So what that means is you're going to actually make sure you understand what the expense is, make sure you are having every single expense listed, every single income stream listed. You're going to include expenses that aren't even present, but probably should be included, like management. You always want to be running with management because you can score a lower cap rate. Also, you want to include your rehab on this type of stage. So this is what a level 2 underwrite looks like. That's a lot, but it's not that complex. So just take a minute to review it. You'll notice it's pretty much the same thing from left to right. It's just a couple things change. And I use a little legend up there for different color coding. I would recommend you do something like this. Again, if you need this, it's on preselling.com. And the color coding is super duper crucial because if you don't, it's just a bunch of numbers and it doesn't make any sense to anybody. So if you don't understand this 1,000,000% right now, that's fine. Go back to that one where I said, hey, don't have a money foundation. And you'll notice it's the exact same thing. It's just copied 5 times over. So lots of different scenarios, left to right. Okay, level 3 underwrite. This is the big boy. This is where you prove everything. This is going to be your sources to all numbers. And you're also going to have quotes on all estimated expenses. You're not going to just ballpark them or even estimate them. You're going to have actual quotes. And then you're going to have your pro forma rent unit by unit. So that's saying I'm going to take of my 20 units that I'm buying, I'm going to put this guy at this dollar amount, this guy at this dollar amount. You're literally going that specific. And you'll notice there's a huge increase typically if you're just very particular about actually paying attention to who's got to be paying what. You also want to be looking at your rehab costs unit by unit. And we'll be covering a little bit more on rehab later on. By the way, your level 3 underwrite needs to be accounting for cash flow at this point in time, because if you're buying something that's negatively cash flowing, then it might not be a good deal, even if it has a big value add. And your full market rent data is going to be about 30 comps. You want to have as many as possible, the more the merrier. But this is not the time to be playing around with a maybe, is it good enough? Your loan terms are also going to need to be determined at this point in time because you're about to be closing, ideally, or you need to be prepared to go close. So make sure you're getting the actual terms figured out. Make sure you have it with a source. So what does a level 3 underwrite look like? If you're about to buy, you need to go all the way. It is not good enough to just do whatever the minimum is, right? There's literally, the sky's the limit, and there's no one grading you on this stuff. It is your money, your time, your whatever that you're doing. But your underwrite should literally make your computer run out of memory. And I mean that jokingly, of course. But you just need to go as hard as you possibly can on making sure you really understand your information on this. Quick concept review that we have here to wrap up our first module, which hopefully has been very, very informative for you. So Number one, what are the three groups in a syndication? It's going to be your general partner, your limited partner, and your debt partner. Now, I say debt partner intentionally here because it's a misnomer. If you remember earlier on, people call it a debt partner when really it's a lender, and they're not an actual partner. What is your percent return if you are a general partner? Freaking infinite. Like, you literally have no money into the deal. You are making an infinite return. You can just rinse and repeat and do this all day long. And then three types of leverage that are main types of leverage that we've been talking about is capital, time, and the big one is skill. A lot of people don't talk about skill. Other types of leverage, though, is going to be brand, content, relationship, information, code, process optimization, resource, and a bunch of others. These are just the big ones that I figured would be most relevant to you today. And then also, why does it make sense to partner with people? Is because of skill leverage. Everybody's going to work a lot more efficient at the end of the day, and there's a way less time total spent. If you remember from the previous example, it was like maybe just over 300 hours total when it was previously 800 hours. So huge time difference for the whole project. What's your NOI and what is OPEX? So NOI is your gross minus your expense. That is always measured annually. And then your OPEX is your expense divided by your gross. OPEX is typically expressed as a percent. You can also see it as a dollar. Cap rate is your NOI divided by your total price, which is either your price plus rehab or your value, depending on how you want to utilize it. And then the difference between price and value: price is what you buy it for, and value is what it's worth. What others are willing to pay for is what it's actually worth at the end of the day. So don't be thinking it's something it's not. It's figure out what people are willing to pay. That's what it's actually worth. Assuming A and B are the exact same, but B is the harder to run property because it's more work, which one should have a higher cap rate? Would be the one that's hard to do. So investment B should have a higher cap rate because you're doing more work. It's not the same as a savings account, then you need to be, and it's more work than a savings account, it should have a higher return than a savings account. Three value levers is going to be increasing gross, decreasing expense, and compressing cap rate. And then if you have three identical units, I want you to really think about this one for a second because this is kind of like an advanced question. Three identical units are rented for $800, $900, and $1,000, and the market's at $1,050. What should your GOI be, your gross income per year? So it should be probably about $3,000. The reason why is you don't want to go over market rent. You want to stay under market rent. You probably don't want to be getting down to like $10 increments because that gets weird. But then you want to bring your floor up to your ceiling, so to speak. So anybody that's willing to pay $1,000, you already know that there is at least one person there. So you know you're 800, 900, assuming they're the exact same unit, then you could actually bring them up to that. And you've already determined market rent, essentially. And then what is two easy ways to compress your cap rate is going to be adding management, and a less talked about one is standardizing rent. Three levels of underwrites, literally 1, 2, 3. Ballpark, estimate, and then finally prove. Make sure you do a really good job on all three, and make sure you do them in order. You don't need to do infinite research on a property that you've never even called the guy on. You're just wasting your own time at the end of the day. Okay, so we have practice problems for this. If you go on the website, it is right there, the QR code. That is going to be practice on how to underwrite a property given a bunch of random information. Also, there is a free tool, which is AutoDD. So this is, you punch in an address and it just tells you, here's all the crazy facts you need to know about it. So we're talking market rent, we're talking flood zone, FEMA hazards, radon levels, bunch of crazy stuff, all free, gives it to you in about 30 seconds. It's pretty quick. I actually really like it. So, and it's spotted stuff too, like wholesaling regulations, for instance. If you don't even know what the laws are in an area and you're trying to wholesale, or if you're trying to buy something and it turns out the tenants have the right to buy it first, this is going to pick up on stuff like that. So if you're not using a system like this, you really need to. It's literally 100% free. Information is one thing, but application is everything. So if you haven't already, you really need to join the community Discord, where you can apply all concepts that you learn and learn all sorts of crazy things from people with millions and millions and millions of dollars to people that are starting for the very first time that are looking for someone to partner up with. Everything is free. We do weekly events in the community Discord. There's a QR code right there as well. And I'm also going to make sure to include the link in the description below. If you have not learned anything or thought about anything differently, your parents must love you because you're really teachable. Also, your significant other must love you because you're a really good listener. And your kids must love you because you just have all the money in the world. Otherwise, you need to pay me. Here's exactly how. Any of the following work for payment. You can give me 40 seconds of positive feedback, 40 seconds of negative feedback. You can subscribe, which seriously helps me out. And you get exclusive resources. I'm going to be incorporating actually a thing in the future that's going to be really, really cool. It's It's going to be the first few people that get onto a video are going to be the ones that have access to an exclusive resource. Also, if you join the community for networking, events, everything else you need, resources, I mean, I'm putting a crazy amount of time into this stuff. It's all free. And the earliest people to join are going to be getting something extra special here in just a couple of months. Also, if you need to, you can just send me $15,000 for the course. Just kidding. Everything's free. Go to preselling.com.